You're listening to Back Pew Convos.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Sal. And this is the podcast God wants you to listen to.
So if you want to remain in God's will, have a sit down.
Grab a beverage of your choice.
And have a listen.
You're welcome.
It's like a circle.
A shirker.
My. Check out my hat.
Seen that. Do you steal that from your dad?
No,
Your dad really does love gospel music.
he does. And I actually don't.
Right. That's why I asked if you stole it from your dad.
Yeah. It's one of those things that's supposed to be like an ironic thing, right?
I get it.
Yeah. It depends on what we're calling gospel music. I like some music that would be classified as a gospel-esque,
Right.
but not like.
I have literally not one single time have I ever opened up my Spotify and just turned on gospel music. 0% of the time. Not one instance. I've listened to some pretty obscure things. Not once have I listened to gospel music on Spotify.
Yeah, so it kind of depends on what we are classifying as gospel, because like there's some gospel like bands where like the musicians are crazy good,
Of course.
like the drummers and the bass.
There's a lot of
What are you? Oh, what do I? Never mind.
it just seems to be something that's tied to church culture, and I don't know. Maybe it's a divine thing, maybe not. I don't know, but it seems like there are the church itself, the American church, and probably the world church is just filled with fantastic musicians. I mean,
Yeah.
people that you will never hear of, but they were fantastic, better than probably the people on the radio.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's certainly always been true with our church. Yeah, we've always had like crazy good musicians at our church.
Which, I mean, that church has always historically had it's attracted musicians as well, just because it's the music and worship service itself is always sort of played predominantly into the culture of the church at large. So,
Right. For better or worse.
right.
I've thought about that some this week, but I don't know.
You've thought about that a lot here lately, actually, because me and you talked about that a few weeks ago. So that's something that's lingering for you.
Yeah, it's, you know what? It just my background,
Right.
just still wrestling with a lot of that stuff. Like what am I holding on to from what I was given, and what am I not? And if I am holding on to it, am I reconfiguring it somehow?
Right.
Or reconfigure is probably the wrong word, but
it's pretty easy to see why it would be something that factors in heavily for you, just because, number one, what we just said, which is the church that you have attended for the most of your life. I mean, not your entire life, but the most of it,
Yeah.
and it factors so heavily in that specific church is culture. But even within that, macrocosm, the microcosm, your immediate family is a family of musicians. Your uncle was as long as I've been attending there, the leader of the worship team, as well as the
Right.
pastor now, but he wasn't then, but even then he was the worship leader. Your brother is a drummer, you're a drummer, your dad plays bass on there now, but he can play drums. Who knows what else? I mean, your entire family, it tends to be musically inclined.
Right. I mean, I played guitar there for years.
Yeah.
Not well, but I did it.
You were a good chugger.
But what place does that have in praise and worship?
Whatever. I mean, what
I
place doesn't it have? It has just as much place as anything else, does it not?
I guess it can. It did.
Why does a particular, style have to be? No, it's just as applicable as anything else.
I suppose. sometimes I do wonder even about that though, like the style of like the music, because we probably need to put something underneath one of these legs to even it out.
Sorry, guys, I'm parched. Okay, I got my beverage of choice this week: the Coca-Cola Zero Sugar Orange Cream.
I've got the Diet Dew. Oh, have you seen the new design? The current design of the cans?
Oh, it's sort of like a throwback.
Yeah,
I haven't seen that.
it's a throwback.
Yeah. Throwing it back.
But anyway, so like what I was thinking about with the music thing is like, I just, I know this is something that like, Kat has even said this, and this is like something that is, if you just think about the amount of worship to preaching or Sunday school like ratio, we're playing music usually on average way longer than anyone's preaching.
Tell me about it.
And so like that just has certain implications, certain downstream effects where a lot of your theology that you're putting into the atmosphere there at your church is coming from the songs.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, if it's like a 3-to-1 ratio or something,
Right.
like that
I mean, I've even been, I know, of course, you'll remember this too, but there's been times when the worship service would get so boisterous that it would just drag on and on and on to where there wouldn't even be preaching afterwards. They were like, man, we've been doing praise and worship for 3.5 hours. Like, now we're just going to go home. You know what I mean? There's been services where it was 100% of the service.
Yeah.
Now, that's been years.
Right. Yeah.
But it's happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know. I just wonder, like, I don't know. I'm not saying necessarily that any of that's entirely bad.
Right.
But, and I'm not saying that you can't. So, like, sometimes, and this hasn't happened as much recently in recent years as it used to, but like, we would even do like, where like just the musicians would play and there wouldn't even be anyone singing.
Right. Right.
So then, and that's not necessarily like, I get that like people can be moved by the music itself. And like, I don't want to be guilty of the same thing we just talked about in that one of the previous episodes about putting limitations on the spirit.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I fully believe that like the spirit is able to move in that way, but it does just make me wonder. I do have that a sort of internal battle within myself now about like, would it not be better to have something that is verbalizing this praise, this that's telling us about who God is? And you know what? Maybe the music is doing that in a way that I just am not. I mean, I don't know.
Right.
I do
you.
believe that.
I'm actually, so I come to this argument as not a musician. Not, I mean, Kelly sings, you know, so she's part of the worship team, but I'm not, you know, I have nothing to do with it. So, and to be honest, I've said this on here before. That's the worship service is my least favorite part of all of church. Like, I'm somebody who really, really likes the scholarly stuff. So I love digging into like the Sunday school and the Wednesday night Bible studies, Paul and Silas. Like, I love those kind of stuff. You know, like, I like preaching too, you know, but not quite as much as like an actual classroom setting. But
Right.
you know, worship service, I don't really feel like I get much of anything from, and I don't really. It's my least favorite part of the whole thing. So I'm, you know, preference and everything with that. But also, I do believe, you know, trying to think about how I want to phrase this. Like there are, I believe at least that there is something to vibrations, I guess. Maybe it's way
Right,
new
yeah.
age, you know what I mean? But but there is something to it. I mean, I think I've talked about that before in here, but there's studies that show even like playing music for plants helps them to grow better. You know what I mean? So there is something
Right.
to music. Um, I just don't understand what it is, but
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
I guess there is that part of me that still is maybe a little bit mystical in a way that sort of is like, man, I kind of understand that, but it's always like an internal battle because the on the opposite shoulder of me, I understand how music manipulates emotions. You know, like I seen a TikTok video recently. That seems to be a theme. That's like a weekly thing I do now. It's like I seen a video, but
Mm.
he was like talking about it was a guy talking and he was talking about growing up in a church like that where the worship was like the center focus and everything, and he experienced these emotions that he felt like were really really like like that's God moving or whatever. But then he went to a secular concert and felt the exact same thing, and he was like, oh, now I just really like live music. Like it's not, you know what I mean? And so like there's that other part of me that recognizes that manipulate, and I don't really like to use manipulation because if you don't understand what I'm saying, that can imply that it's intentional, that it's like a backhanded thing that the people who are doing the music are intending to do. And I don't think that that's the case at all. All I mean when I use that is just in the literal sense. It can make you can use music can make you feel a certain way. You can be completely fine and hear a song on like Spotify Shuffle and it completely shift your mood. You know what I mean? Because that's the power that music has. And so
Right.
to your point, while acknowledging that there is some power to music that is perhaps a good thing, there's also a danger to it to where like, are you really worshiping God? Is that really the spirit, or is it just is that just your emotions being manipulated by the music that you're listening to? You know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's always that kind of struggle, that right hand versus left hand thing with me.
Yeah. And yeah, I like I said, I don't want to put like boundaries or box in the spirit, and like even in that example, like the just because it's a secular band or song,
Right.
that still doesn't mean that the spirit within
Right.
isn't resonating with something in this, isn't, you know what I mean? Like there's
Yeah.
stuff that like
I don't downplay that at all. I mean, that was just that guy's
yeah,
interpretation,
yeah, yeah.
of his own experience. But
Right.
yeah, I actually have entire playlists that I've created on Spotify that I've like named like spiritual names. One of them I think is called like My Kind of Church, and there's another one, but they're none of them, or very few of them, are actually what you would classify as worship music. Most of them are secular bands, secular songs, but they speak to my spirit. I think that they're spirituals, and so
Right, yeah. Well, like that actually I'm not sure how you pronounce the name of this song, but I literally just heard it earlier during my workouts. Modest Yahoo. Uh, is it Ayeka?
oh yes, I love that one. Ayeka, Teach Me to Love.
Yeah. So like that one,
That one moves me too. Something
yeah.
about that song like will literally bring tears to my eyes.
Well, it didn't make me cry,
I mean, it doesn't do that
but
every time, but I have cried to it before.
yeah, yeah. Teach me to love. Like that's just that line kind of like stuck with me because like I mean I think it's actually about like his son or something, right? Or his,
I think so.
but like the
Becoming a father,
yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
So like it's not necessarily that like the lyrical content necessarily speaks to me except for that one line, but even just that it can be something that simple though.
Yeah.
Even just like a line from a song out of context can speak to you, you know.
Right. I mean, that's one of
So,
like Bob Marley is, which his music was, I would consider very highly spiritual, even though most people, I don't think, at least from a conservative view of Christianity, would view him as very spiritual. I mean, he was a proponent of the ganja and had multiple children with multiple wives, like by
right.
a lot of people would look down upon that. I know at least a lot of people from my past would, but like I find his music to be like almost every song is so deeply spiritual. Like to me, listening to Bob is a spiritual experience. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of his lyrics are really good, you know. Oh, I like it.
yeah, man.
But anyway, I don't even know how we got on this.
It was the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, it's something that I struggle with, and I think I brought this up at the last the last worship Sunday school class that we had, where like the worship team gets together and has Sunday school once a month, and I was just talking about like that struggle, like especially, and it's just completely different now than it used to be. My relationship with all of that, prior to my deconstruction, and then through my deconstruction, and then now, like it's just completely different experiences all the way around. And so like now, I get uncomfortable now whenever it's like just music, or like if there's like people are like there's a lot of guitar solo going on. I don't know if Jeff or Elijah watch the podcast or not,
I
but
know Jeff has it a few times.
it's no offense, but uh something about it just feels weird to me now. That like we're like up there, and like I understand how that can be that's how they worship, right? Like I understand that I'm not saying that there's not anything to that, but it does, to me, it I don't know, it just feels weird to me now. It almost feels more like a concert type deal, or like I don't know. It's just a struggle that I have.
Well, that's what I think that the takeaway is, that you seem to be, I think doing a good job of expressing, is that it's not more than anything, it's a struggle, right? It's like a conflict that you're having within you, conflicting feelings, and you can, or just like what I was saying, where I like on one hand I understand this, but on the other hand I see this, and it's that tension between these two hands of like I just don't know what to think about this anymore. I don't. It's funny enough that seems to be a theme for me and you, because that was me last week, right? I said straight out the outset with the topic, I don't know what I'm caught in the in between, and I don't know what to think. Like that's.
Yeah.
It seems to be, which I guess really is the theme of Back Pew Convos, right? This is supposed to be things that we are wrestling with that are uncomfortable to talk about, things that you may not even wouldn't feel comfortable saying in front of the church, but, we're having
Right.
the private conversation in the back pew. We're just broadcasting it for everybody, for the entire world.
Not private.
It's not private for everybody else,
Right.
but our convo is out in the open. But
Yeah.
so, yeah, that seems to be it's kind of cool that we're both. Because I was, actually, that's something that I've thought about this week. I haven't thought about a whole lot of anything, really, not much of usefulness, but that's one of the things that after we recorded last week's episode, I was really having a rough time with it. Really, I didn't like the way. I just didn't. Not that it was a bad conversation. I think it was a good conversation. It was a fine episode, but because I was so vulnerable in the episode, and I felt exposed in that vulnerability, that it made me feel uncomfortable. After at the day after and the next day after that, as I was thinking back on it and kind of recalling the memories of it, I felt so vulnerable and exposed and sort of like embarrassed for being so vulnerable. You know what I mean? But then just having that. That I don't know, just working that out in public. You know what I mean? Just
Yeah. But I think that's good. It doesn't feel good.
right.
Like I understand it can feel embarrassing, and even like a little cringe, like maybe I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is it's no different. I've thought about the same topic most of this week. That's the topic I've spent more time thinking on than anything, and I'm no closer to feeling like I have a better understanding. It doesn't make any more sense to, like, I'm literally in the same spot. So I'm not embarrassed by the things that I said in the episode. Like, but it's just that exposure, just being so vulnerable for everybody else, that is uncomfortable. But that's not, like you said, it's not a bad thing to be uncomfortable. It's probably a good thing, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that those. I don't know. I think that those moments where we are uncomfortable is, that's where the most growth comes from. And I know it's sort of like an obvious thing to say, but it's true though.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that Yeah, I mean, I think that in some ways that is the judgment of God. Being finding yourself in situations where um so like this is something I thought about today, which is I was listening to a podcast, and of course it was Chris Green, and um he was I listened to a couple different ones, so I'm probably getting like mixing ones together, but he was talking about John and John the Baptist specifically, and how John
Baptizer.
the baptizer, yeah, and how John was in prison. And, Jesus specifically says, "Whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me." And he tells people to go visit people in prison, but he never goes and visits John.
Yeah.
Right. Well, but and John, it's been a while since I went and read it for myself, so I don't remember exactly why John doubts, but if there's any one guy that should have not doubted that Jesus was who was the Messiah, it probably should have been John, right? The one who the voice crying out in the wilderness, like uh, the one who prepares the way, cousin,
Who leaped in his mother's womb, apparently,
exactly,
allegedly,
right? According to the story.
according to legends.
So, like, like you would think if anyone was gonna believe and not have those any kind of doubts, it would be John. But yet, even John finds himself in prison and sends like messengers to Jesus and is like, he wants to know if you're really the guy or not, or should we look for someone else? And like the way that Chris put it kind of was like that is, for one, Jesus is there. Jesus is in John, so he doesn't have to visit John because he is John. He's in John in prison. But aside from that, because whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me, right? But aside from that, John needs that experience to learn, I think, that Jesus is in him. Like there's something about that experience that John has, that experience of doubt, um, that is needed for John, that's painful, right? But it's not harmful. It's for the purpose of it's for his good, it's for his growth. So like that you can only imagine putting yourself in John's shoes, being in prison and like hearing about all these things Jesus is doing, and maybe things that he wasn't doing that John maybe thought he should have been doing. Like who knows why? Like I don't know. I don't think the text says. I don't remember exactly why he has this moment of doubt. It had to have either been because Jesus was doing something he didn't think he should have been, or wasn't doing something he thought he should be doing.
Right. I mean, ultimately, like you said, we're left to speculate, but I sort of can see a theme where if I had to speculate, what do I think? I think it's because it probably that the Jesus way, the Christ way, the way of his revolution didn't look like what they expected it to look like. They were expecting a war hero that was going to give them freedom. Even Peter thought that. I think it makes sense to think that John thought that. I mean, if you know the story of John the Baptist, his father was a priest. He was supposed to have been doing his duties in the temple, but where was he preaching? Where was he baptizing people? In the wilderness. Like
Right.
that's him. He's bucking the system. He's going outside of the temple system. You know what I mean? So he's already, which you get to the Holy Week of Jesus and he clears the temple, and he seems to also be bucking that temple system in a way, and it
Right.
seems like he's in that same line as John, but the way he's going about it is not what John expects, perhaps.
Right.
It's just close enough for John to recognize it, but not the way he would expect it to look like. So there's a little bit of, is this the one or not?
Right. But I just think it's interesting to think about, like, because that's the judgment of God, but we don't always recognize that. Like, whenever we're reading these texts, we don't think, like, we read Mark 9, if your right eye offends you, pluck it out, right? Oh, well, that's judgment. That's hell talk, right? Or,
Don't pluck out your eyes. Don't do that.
or like even some of Jesus's parables where like they can seem very judgmental,
Yeah.
and sort of like wrathy even, and we're like, oh, those are the judgment text and those are the wrath text, but like that story of John having that experience in prison is just as much the judgment and wrath of God as the parable of the sheep and the goats, or rich man and Lazarus, or whatever it is you want to point to.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, I think so.
And that was just a thought that I had, and it just reminded me of that whenever we were talking about being uncomfortable, being vulnerable.
Well, and a lot of it to go with what you're saying is you have to get to that point to ever experience growth, right? Because the only way to get uncomfortable like that is to start asking uncomfortable questions. Like if you're afraid to ask those questions, or you're afraid to be vulnerable with that, if you think you've got it all figured out, then you're never going to grow. You have to become vulnerable in order to experience that. It's like a prerequisite for it,
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. Has nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, I was trying to think of a smooth segue into the actual topic at hand, but I don't guess we have one.
That seems to be the another theme that we have formatted in our show, is that we talk about whatever's actually been on our mind for the first 20 minutes, and then we'll be like, oh, that has nothing to do with our topic, and then we go into the topic.
Right. Free will. There's our segue. You just say it.
Free will. Free willy.
And it's Philip's fault.
This is Philip's fault.
Phil, if you're listening or watching, it's your fault.
If you're not watching, I'm going to be extremely disappointed, because we're recording this episode strictly for you.
We're hoping that we can set you straight by the end of it.
I'm going to free your will.
No, we tell people to reach out to us all the time, and no one ever does. But we did.
But Phil did.
Yeah.
So
asked us a question.
Actually, that makes him the greatest of all.
Yeah.
The greatest of all Back Pew listeners.
The greatest in the kingdom.
He can sit at our right hand.
Which also means he's last.
Yes.
Because the last are first.
So, free will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't really thought about it too much.
Whack.
Since today.
It seems like a really big topic to come into blind.
Yes, it is. I actually was thinking about that exact thing on the way over here. I was like, at the last second, I was trying to find like something on YouTube to listen to on the way over here. Try to get something just to get my mind rolling in that direction at least.
Yeah, I had read it years ago, but it's probably been 10 years ago now since I read. It was a book I have on my Kindle. It's called Free Will. It was written by Sam Harris, and I read it, but I read about 75% of it today, just in my breaks at work, and after work, just to try to jog, some of that stuff that I'd read 10 years ago back within me. Luckily, it's only like an 85-page book, so it doesn't take much to.
Right.
But
so basically, and I said this a couple episodes back, I go back and forth on the topic a lot. There's just a lot to consider, and I haven't been satisfied with anything anyone's ever said about it ever.
I think I said something pretty similar to that last week.
Yeah, you did. Just different topics.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to cut you off. I thought you were done.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, like, Calvinist, Arminian, Molinist, like, none of those. Anytime I ever hear the thing that is closest to what I think is the Molinist position, but anytime anyone that's a Molinist tries to explain that, it just sounds like nonsense to me. So I wouldn't claim to align with that Molinist way of understanding all of it. But like,
You wouldn't slap that label on your forehead.
right. What was you going to say?
I was just going to say that I think, for me, the starting place to this conversation, before we even get into what we think about it, I think it's important to define terms.
Yeah.
Because what I have experienced in the conversations that I've had with people is a lot of not understanding the terminology being used, and so we end up saying the same thing, but because we're using different terms, we feel like we're disagreeing.
Yeah.
Or maybe we think we're agreeing, but because we're using different terms, we're actually disagreeing, and we don't recognize, like there's a lot of that. So
And then some people are just really stubborn.
yes. But because generally when we talk about this topic, there's two phrases that I've used traditionally, and I think you've used them as well, which is free will, and free choice.
Yep.
And those are not the same things.
Right. To us, yeah.
Right. When we talk about it, or when I talk about it, I don't want to talk for you, but when I talk about it, these are two clearly defined things, okay? So a will, when you say that God wills this, what does that mean? A will is your desire. All right? So that means a truly free will would be a desire that is free to do anything it wants to do, right? So that, I think, the way that I understand that would be a will. Your desires are not tied down to nothing is influencing your desire. It's simply what you cognitively desire in that moment. Not because of some external or internal factors. It's truly free. Free choice means you can choose to do or not to do something. And that's why I think it's important to define those terms, because most of the time when I've had the conversation, when people say and use the term free will, what they're actually talking about is free choice.
Right.
That you have the choice to do something or not to do something. You have the option to drink that beer or to not drink that beer. You have the option to, that's used as free will, but that's actually free choice. In the way that I would understand it, in the way that I would, the terminology that I use, that's the way that I use those. Will is desire. Choice means you're choosing something to do or to not to do something.
Right. Yeah, I agree with those terms. I mean, to me, if you just look at those words definitionally, like free and will, I think it's pretty easy to demonstrate that we don't, in fact, have a free will.
Right.
But we are free to make choices. And even maybe that is...
Maybe.
Maybe. Yeah, again, that's where I go back and forth. Yeah, but it's one of those things where it's just hard to... Because, and I know that, like, for one thing, free will, for some people, that concept of free will, well, for one thing, I think it's, for a lot of people, I probably in my own tradition, I would say that free will is probably something that is just a given that you just take for granted as it is the truth.
Right.
But then there's, for some people, I think it is the only way that they are able to hold together certain things having to do with hell and the problem of evil, for sure.
Right.
And so it's a thing that, like, I think people feel like some people probably feel like they have to hold on to this because this is such an integral part of how they hold all these other big things together,
Right.
So.
But I don't think it has to be.
Right.
I think that goes back to something that we talked about before we even got into the topic, which is being vulnerable and uncomfortable. And make yourself uncomfortable. It's okay.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's why I've said before that first step to doing that, to asking those questions, is to actually understand, lose that fear. Like once you lose that fear, then you're able to ask questions. You know what I mean? But if you're caught in a religion of fear, then some of those questions are too costly to even ask. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. And that's why it's, because when I have thought about the issue today, this is one thing I did think about, which was, Phil basically said, am I against free will because I'm afraid that it would mean the universalism isn't true. Is that how he worded it?
I don't remember the exact word, but the gist of it was: are you afraid of free will, the idea of free will, because it poses a threat to the doctrine of universal salvation or universalism or whatever, you know?
Right. And that is like, that wasn't even a thing that was like, whenever he posed a question, that was just an immediate no from me.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't, it's not something that, well, for one, there's plenty of people that Origin, who's kind of known as like the father, even though he wasn't the first one, certainly, he was an early church figure who was clearly a universalist.
Right.
And but he was also a really big free will guy, was like insistent on it. And so, like, I mean, a lot of universalists throughout history have been pretty like big on free will. Like, it's not, free will doesn't pose a threat to universalism from my perspective.
Not if you take the will of God seriously and God's power, right? I mean, ultimately, all you're saying is that I think that God's will is more powerful than your will.
Right.
He'll go that extra, however far you go, he'll take another step.
Yeah. He's already there.
Exactly.
Waiting on you.
So
he's already been there.
That's, I mean, to me, that's an easy question to answer. Like, what? No, it's literally just taking the power of God seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. But like, so what made me think about this is, you're talking about the fear and like, God's goodness. I'm just so convinced.
Yeah.
That God is good. That doesn't, there's not a fear for me in that. Like, I'm not afraid of this question of free will or determinism, because I'm just that convinced, no matter what it is, no matter what the truth of the matter is, which we're not solving it today.
No.
But no matter what the truth of this issue is, I have just been so convinced of the goodness of God that it doesn't pose me any sort of fear or threats.
Right.
Either way.
Yeah. I mean, that's just the thing. I mean, that's really what I'm getting at when I say, like, the first step to actually asking those hard questions is losing that fear, right? Because, that's basically what allows me to have the freedom to ask those hard questions, because I truly believe that even if I get the questions wrong, if my answers to those hard questions are wrong, God's going to have mercy. Knowing the intents of the heart and knowing that I did the best with the information that I had, right? Which gets into the free will discussion a little bit, because like I can't control what it is I think about or what it is I believe. That's just something that happens within my brain. It's now a lot of what I choose to do and what I believe, and what I think about certain things is framed around a lot of different things, like my life experiences, where I was born, the time I was born, who my parents are, how they raised me. They raised me the way their parents raised them, or like because human beings are so complex, and so like understanding all of that, like if I don't have the right answers, God's going to understand all those factors and why I don't have it, and you have mercy on me for that.
Right.
Like I don't have to fear that.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got the wrong answer. Like, yeah, okay. There's going to be more where that came from. I'm sure of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just all doing our best. So, is there any more terms that you think we need to?
I just think that the big thing is making that distinction between free will and free choice, simply because, like I said, in a lot of the conversations that I've had around this topic, people use the term free will when they're actually talking about free choice. Like to give I guess a practical example, right? Let's just say that you're really thirsty and you really are craving a Coca-Cola classic. That's your will. That's your desire. My desire is to have a Coca-Cola. but my freedom of choice, like, and I can't control that, like, right? Like, I don't tell myself, like, you know what, I'm going to make myself crave a Coca-Cola,
Right.
right? Those cravings, the things that you like and dislike, those, you have no faculties over that. So, like, you get a hankering for something that just comes. You don't decide, like, you know what I'm going to really fiend for today? Coca-Cola. You know what I mean? So that will, that desire, it arises without your control. You're not controlling that. That's not free will. But you do have a free choice, because when you go up and open up the fridge, there's a can of Coke sitting there and there's a bottle of water. You can make a choice.
Right.
Which one do you want to choose, right? The Coca-Cola, that's your freedom of choice. So, like, that's kind of using the terms in a practical example. The desire, your will, is your desire to have a Coca-Cola, but you do have the freedom of choice, which you have no control over, but you do have the freedom of choice to actually drink the Coca-Cola or to choose water or some other drink. You know what I mean? So,
Right. And why are you craving that Coke? There could be all kinds of different reasons for it. Maybe you saw a commercial for Coke yesterday, and it's somehow in your mind. You may not even remember the commercial, but now you're like, man, I really want a Coke.
To me, that's what makes this whole discussion about will or free. Surprise, surprise! I don't believe in free will. Like that, I don't even. So to me, it's not even a matter of belief. It's just not a thing. But to me, that's what makes this conversation so interesting. Is actually thinking about, like, well, then what is it that drives your will? Why do I desire certain things and not other things? Like,
Right.
what is it about? Like, because to me, it makes the story even so much more beautiful, really. And that's the paradox of this topic for me. Is I think a lot of people are, ironically enough, we were talking about fear. There's a fear in losing the idea of free will, because we all want to feel like we're in control of everything. That no matter what situation I'm in, I can always make the right decision, or that I'm always in control to make any decision that I want to make. Ultimate freedom. There's something about freedom. Like, we were born to be free. There's just something about freedom, like that we desire. And so the thought of not having that or losing that is scary to a lot of people. But I think it makes the story more beautiful, because if you think about those things that you don't have any control over, and think about what it is that causes you to have that will or that desire or those cravings, and you think about how many different factors, there's no way around understanding that all life on this planet is intimately interconnected. That the person that you are, is shaped by, like, every generation of every person that's ever lived, really, because you're, like I was hinting at a while ago, like, what part of what shapes us as people is our parents, right?
Right.
But then you can't just start with your parents, because they're not the first generation, because they were shaped and formed by not just their parents, but the world that they lived in, the time and the culture and the place and the location, and their parents and their church and all of these things help to shape your parents into the people that they are, which trickled into the person that you are, right? So then you got to look at their parents, and it's so you can literally trace it back generation after generation, culture after culture, and see how the person that we are has been shaped and molded intricately by just generations and generations and environments. And there's no way to escape the interconnectedness of all of life with this understanding. Like, if you actually take a moment to think about your desire and your will, even though it's not free, because you don't decide what it is that you like or don't like, but like, or what you will, what you desire, but it does give you that sense of connectedness. And to build onto that, it makes you take seriously that freedom of choice. It makes you take it really seriously, the situations and circumstances that you put yourself in, and the things that you do, because it gives you a sense of understanding, the best that we can, that the things that I'm doing impact those around me. That impacts my son. That impacts, my friends' children, and that generation, and then they're gonna the person that they become, of which I'm a small part of shaping these people that I interact with, are going to pass that on to the next generation after them.
Right.
When I'm long gone, the effects of the choices that I've made and the things that I've done, the interactions that I've had with other people, are going to trickle in so you have to take seriously the things that you are in, where you do have control over and faculties over. You don't get a free pass. You have to take seriously the things that you do, because it impacts, and I'm not even talking about like afterlife stuff. It impacts all the life on the earth after you too.
Right, yeah. Yeah. Especially, yeah. That was one thing I wanted to make sure that we did get across in this, was the importance of your choices do matter, and they have real consequences.
Right.
Even if your will isn't free.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you said that. That was something that there was only one point I actually had that I like wanted to make sure we made it, and that was it.
And I think it's easy, like pretty much with anything, it's easier to see at the extremes, right? So think about like somebody who's abusive to their spouse. And why are they like that? Well, maybe that they saw, maybe there's that man, when he was a child, saw his dad
Yeah.
hit his mom.
Right.
And of course other things, because humans are but that's a factor that played into shaping that man into who he is today.
Right.
And then because of the person that he's been shaped into, he grows up into somebody that hits his spouse in front of his children who see him do that. So then now they're intaking that, and that witnessing their father hit their mother is shaping them into. Now, that doesn't mean that they're destined to be like that.
Right.
But it is because human beings are super complex, and there's so many different things that factor into shaping us into the person that we are. But it is a factor.
Yeah.
And so perhaps as part of something that molds people, that's something that becomes ingrained within them, and then they hit their spouse in front of their children. And that's, you see what I'm saying? Like, it literally, or maybe you kiss your son goodnight every night when you tuck him into bed and tell him that you love him. And after years and years of that has shaped and molded that man into somebody that's comfortable showing affection, and that's learned how to be a present father.
Right.
And to learn what it means to be a good father. And then when they have children of their own, because of that influence.
Right.
So you have to take seriously the things that you're doing, you know what I mean? But that's, right, to me, understanding that you don't have the free will in that makes that even more. It's not less important. It's even more important.
Right. Yeah.
Because you can't control what it is you will. You were shaped by your environment and your experiences and your circumstances, and you can't help. Now, you can choose not to live those things out to a certain extent. There's debate around that even, but
yeah, right. Yeah. But one thing I know that neither one of us would say is that you still have responsibility to make good choices with whatever you're given,
right,
with whatever hand that you're dealt.
Right.
And yeah, those, like you said, those things can affect you in lots of different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to affect you in a negative sense. It could affect you towards a positive, like, I don't want that for my family, so I'm going to change that. It could have effects, depending on what it is, it could have effects where, like, you go the opposite direction in a way that's also unhealthy. Like you want the exact opposite of what how your parents treated you, so you treated your kids in the polar opposite of that, but then that polar opposite is also unhealthy.
Right. It's like smothering or something.
Right.
Like you had parents that were always absent, and you were determined that you weren't going to be that. So now you're smothering, and you're a helicopter parent, always hovering over your children. Like,
right. And so it can affect us in all kinds of different ways, and maybe that that can become a vicious cycle of just a back and forth, generation to generation. And that's why I think a lot. Like some of the language in scripture, like it's like even whenever Moses asked God to show him his glory, and he reveals his character, his nature to him, the part at the end that always makes us uncomfortable is the part where he says, he says, I'm gracious and all merciful, all these good things, and then he gets to the end and he says, um, but I by no means clear the guilty from generation to generation. Uh, he doesn't clear the guilty.
Right.
Like that's a hard saying. And that's one that can make us uncomfortable if you aren't totally convinced that this judge is good.
Right.
That this one who is going to hold you to account for the things you've done only wants you're good.
Right.
If you're not totally convinced of that, that can sound a certain way. But like all of that language in scripture about generations and generations and generational curses, right? And all that kind of stuff that you see in examples of in scripture, that's all related to all of this.
Yeah.
It's real life stuff.
I think that actually puts it's a new paradigm for that verse, when you understand, because for whatever reason, we associate God's judgment with eternal punishment from whatever reason. I don't know if that's just ingrained with us, over centuries or whatever, but for whatever. But there's a practicalness to that of like, no, the guilty will not be. I don't remember the language you use, but it's not as though that guilt is just going to be removed from the face of the earth, generation to generation. Like, no, that's something that, like, the consequences of the actions that you have done reverberate in time, right? Like, if you murder somebody, that person's not coming back. The people that are involved in that person's life and in your life are going to live with those consequences. Those are going to reverberate into unseen and unforeseen places. You know what I mean? Like, the consequences of that cannot be reversed. Those are real.
Yeah.
There's nothing that can be like, that's real life that has consequences. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's no forgiveness for you. There's no redemption for you, in some sort of life that lives afterwards. You don't even need the threat. To me, I don't need the threat of eternal punishment because it's enough punishment on my will to think that I've screwed up my son.
Right.
Yeah, as a father, there's no greater punishment anybody, like, there's nothing that could be more unforgivable to me than the knowledge that I have screwed up my son by my own actions.
Right.
I don't need the threat of eternal hell because that is eternal hell.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, not being able to forgive yourself, I think that is a big part of hell. Like, you are forgiven, but withholding, and I even find it in my own life, I find it easier to forgive other people than to forgive myself.
Yeah, for sure.
I've actually thought several times, and I don't know, maybe I had the thought pop in my head that this is going to come across like pious or something, and I don't really mean it that or necessarily mean it that way. But I mean, honestly, I have thought to myself, like, if anyone's not making it to heaven, maybe it's me. Like, and maybe that's some just inner demons I need to work out. I don't know. But like, I have had that thought, like, if maybe everyone but me is getting saved.
That would be hard to imagine.
I mean, yeah.
Objectively, there are some pretty horrible people out there.
Right.
That have, like, brought death upon a lot of people. To my knowledge, you've never murdered anybody, so.
Right. But that can, like, that lack of forgiveness for yourself, it can drive you to that level,
Yeah.
It's not that I don't live there, but I have had the thought before,
Right.
And I don't mean it literally, but
Yeah.
Yeah. So hell's real.
Yeah.
And we experience it here and now.
Anybody that's lived life should know that.
Right. All of this it reminded me today of, I said I hadn't thought about this, but I have thought about it a little bit. Mainly reading the messages that me and you have sent back and forth. But like, something that this made me think about was that scene from The Shack. You never saw it or read the book, did you?
Nope.
What a scuzzbucket. At least watch the movie. You need to at least watch the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I probably like the book better.
Well, read the book.
I'm a book guy.
Yeah. It's I haven't read the book, but I've seen the movie like, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. It's pretty good.
I do like William Paul Young though.
Yeah, it's
As a
great.
like as a person that I've heard on interviews and
Yeah.
and podcasts.
I actually listened to a podcast with him today. But there's that scene in the shack where, spoiler, I guess, for anyone who hasn't read it or seen it, including you, but you're going to hear about it anyway. There's this scene. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know if I want to spoil that for you.
I mean, I probably have already heard it. As someone who's never seen the movie, I know a lot about it.
Okay, so Mac is the main character,
Yeah.
Mackenzie, and there's a scene where he has this encounter. He has all these different encounters with different with the Father, the Son, the Spirit, and then he also has one with Lady Wisdom, and there's a scene where he is shown this young boy being abused by his father, and essentially what is happening in the scene is Lady Wisdom is trying to make this point to him that he's not the judge, that what Mackenzie views as just and unjust and right and wrong, and these people deserve this punishment and these people don't, and trying to confront him with that the fact that he is not the judge, and that's good.
Right.
It's good that you aren't the judge.
Right.
And so he is shown this picture, this image of this little boy, and he's crying and he's being abused by his father, and he says, does this boy deserve hell? Does he deserve punishment? And he's like, well, of course not. He's the victim here. Well, turns out that this little boy was his abusive father.
Yeah.
So, it's turning that the point being that, like, we don't always know what someone has dealt with.
Right.
We don't know the life that someone has lived, and we don't know their parents or their parents or their parents. We don't know what all these circumstances that has led this person to be the person that they are. So passing judgment on anyone,
Right,
is that's why we aren't the judge.
Right. And to me, that's brought to the forefront when you have this understanding of will and understanding that it's our will isn't truly free. I can't choose to want to do whatever it is that I want to do. You know what I mean? It's just like, do you choose what foods you like, or what color's your favorite color? Or is that just what it is? Like, and I think that there are things that you could probably point to if there are ways to see the personality, like if you could just imagine our person as like a hooked up to some sort of computer system or whatever, and it's like analyzing your personality and like what 50% of this factored into this that made you this part of you like this. You know what I mean? Like, that would be cool if we do, and I know that we could never figure that out, but like, there's so many different things that factor into that. It really brings to light that you can't judge, man. You don't know why people are the way they are. Even if you think they're the most heinous person on the face of the planet, you don't know why they're like that. Like,
right.
And most of them, again, like I said, understanding that will's not free, it makes it hard to judge. It's, to me, it makes compassion easier.
Right. Yeah.
When you understand that, no, this person isn't just a scuzz bucket just because, like, they are the way they are because of certain factors. They're a victim too.
Right.
You know what I mean? It makes compassion easier.
Yeah, and all of that is, not only are we all victims of just the circumstances of life, but we're all victims of, I mean, if you believe that there's a spiritual battle, some sort of spiritual warfare, right? That there is something that wishes us harm. Even if it's, and there's a lot of different ways you could think about all of that, but like, that complicates all of this even more. Like, there is something within us that doesn't always want to do the thing that we know is right.
Right.
So whatever that is playing a factor in all of this as well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I can just think of like this example came to my mind when I was trying to think it through, something like that of like how many, because a real personal example, let me be vulnerable again. Maybe I'll regret that, but I'll be vulnerable. Like one of the things where this really shines through in my own personal testimony, let's just use that churchy word, is like I can't tell you the amount of times, not so much these days, but thankfully, but there's been plenty of times, more times than I'm proud of in my life, where one of my favorite vices in life is alcohol. And there's been times in my life where I would overindulge pretty severely. And why is that? I don't know. Like we could think about there's different factors that factor into that, like I'm not judging any of it. It just is what it is. I enjoy it. I like it. And I don't know why. I always seem to have the choice to do it or not to do it, but there have been times when I have chosen to do it and I have chosen to overdo it. And I woke up the next day and felt so god awful and said, I'm never drinking again. Never doing this again. I feel so bad. I feel so ashamed because if you've never struggled with alcohol and alcoholism, then it's a depressant. It makes you feel really, really high at the time, but when you wake up the next morning, you feel so depressed and so low. And so it's not uncommon when you overdo it to wake up that next morning and just feel so ashamed and just feel and physically just feel bad, obviously, with the hangover, but spiritually feel heavy and ashamed, just depressed. It makes you depressed.
Right.
Telling myself, this is never happening again. Never again will I ever do this. And there's been times when later that same day, I was drunk again.
Yeah.
After waking up that morning, feeling that way and telling myself, I'm never going to do that again. I don't want to do that anymore.
Right.
But there's just something about like, I don't know. And why? Why is that? I don't know. We can't answer that why.
Right. Yeah. And even, yeah, I don't know. All of this gets really tricky because there's always the caveats, right? But like what I was going to say is like, that's why you can't even judge yourself. But also with the caveat of like saying, because all of this has to be heard, I think, as we're not making excuses for people to do whatever they want. That it's not that we're trying to excuse anyone's behavior that like they don't. Like we still have responsibility for the things that we do.
Yeah, I mean the consequences are real. That's
Right.
well, as we just talked about, reverberating generation after generation. I mean the consequences are real.
Right. So I just want to make sure again to make that point. But I just say that to go ahead and say that like I don't think that even judging yourself is not fruitful. We aren't the judge.
Right.
Again. And that's one thing that I heard today in one of those podcasts. Actually, Chris Green said this, and I thought it was really good. Who is the judge? Well, Jesus is the judge, but part of I think what it means for Jesus to be sinless is that he is able to see all of that. Whereas we can just go back to the McKinsey story from the shack. Like he didn't have this knowledge of his father's upbringing, so it's easy to judge him because he didn't know this about him. It's a lot easier to not have that compassion and thus to sin against somebody when you don't know who they really are.
Right.
But Jesus knows everyone and knows them intimately, knows who they are, and knows who they were created to be, and therefore knows sin as sin because he sees the deviation from who you're supposed to be. And so him knowing all of that is part of, I think, why he's able to live a sinless life, because he doesn't have, although he is the only one able to judge, he doesn't have to pass judgment on anyone because he knows everything anyway. Whereas if I don't know your background, I can judge you because I don't know all of that.
Right.
But it becomes increasingly harder. The more you know about someone,
Yeah.
the harder it is to pass judgment on them, and the easier it is to have compassion on them.
Right. I mean, in that book, Free Will, Sam Harris gives an example, and I don't remember all the examples, but he gives 5 examples, and they're all so. Like the first example was like a 4-year-old doesn't know any better. Obviously, he's playing with his father's firearm. It accidentally goes off, kills a woman, and then the next one was like he's a 12-year-old boy who's been abused by his father, and a girl is making fun of him, and he shoots her. And then the next example was, another situation where a person, and a young lady loses her life, and and then there's the last one where he's just a psychopath. It's not the last one was he's just a psychopath. It's a person he didn't know, and he just did it just because he wanted to. And then there's the last example is a person that it fits that example, but the only difference is, come to find out, he has a tumor in the prefrontal cortex of his brain.
Right.
And it's like, so now, like in these situations, they're all similar. They started with a male shooting a 28-year-old woman or whatever it was.
Right.
But notice how we judge all of them differently based on what we know about them and based upon their situations. And kind of showed like how much, like between those last two, the only difference is that that the one guy has a tumor in his brain that makes him do that. The other guy, you don't know that about. Which one is worse? Like you automatically like think that the person that you don't know has a tumor that affects the way that they think. Like, well, that person's more guilty, right? Because he's a real psycho. He has no excuse for, but there isn't. That's the thing, is that the difference is a tumor you can see, you can understand that. But what we don't understand is that the way that our brain works is we don't control to think what we think. Like it's all these other things that are factored in. But to me, it's the same thing as what you're saying, is that it's though. Not knowing, or if you do know these things about people, you automatically start to excuse some of the actions because you understand why they are the way that they are. But the thing about the human brain is that we can't see it. You don't know why people are the way that they are. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, like, from the outside looking in, yeah, it's easy for us to judge that person. The most egregious example for me is in traffic, because that's the last part of me that I'll ever get saved, is my road rage. I can't stand it. People pull out in front of me. Man, I had the perfect example the other day, because it's springtime here in Kentucky. So if those of you that don't know, that means when you leave to work in the morning, you need to leave 15 minutes earlier than you were leaving in the winter months, because chances are you're going to get behind a combine or a tractor. Combine in the fall, tractor with a disc in this time of year, because it's planting season. So I get, on my way to work, because always it seems like, right at the time that people are going to work or getting off work is the time that this has to occur, apparently. But right. I'm behind a giant John Deere tractor. It's taking up both lanes. There's no way around the guy. There's a line 40 cars deep behind this tractor because he's driving 15 miles an hour down the road on a Monday morning where we're all trying to get to work. I finally get around the guy, and I wasn't around the guy. And this is, I bet I followed him for 10 miles going 15 mile an hour. But you finally get around him, and I wasn't in front of him 45 seconds. And a minivan pulls out right in front of me. I have to slam on my brakes to avoid slamming into the back end of this minivan. And I had to follow him all the rest of the way into Owensboro, driving 45 miles an hour. I said some explicit words in that car that day.
Yeah.
I was so mad. So mad. But I don't know why that person pulled out in front of me. Maybe they just got a phone call that their spouse was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance because of an accident, and they're in a hurry and they're trying to get, I don't know that person's story. I judged them immediately because it was inconvenient for me. And immediately I called that person every terrible name that I could think of under the sun. And some of them I made up on the spot. But I don't know why they did that, they could have a perfectly valid reason that, if I knew the reason why they pulled out in front of me, I'd be like, oh yeah, I would have pulled out in front of somebody for that too.
Right.
And maybe there was no reason. Maybe they were just a jerk. Maybe they just pulled out in front of me because they were more concerned with them getting to work than my safety.
Yeah.
But I don't know that. That's the thing.
If they drove 45 after they pulled out in front of you, they probably weren't in much of a hurry. You wouldn't think. But
maybe they're just a real scumbag.
Rack and frack.
Maybe they seen me coming and was like, oh, I know what would be really funny, and just pulled out in front of me because they knew it would tick me off.
Maybe.
But I don't know. So I shouldn't judge them because I don't know the answer. I don't know their story.
Yeah.
That's the point, is I don't know.
You know what really grinds my gears?
What's that? People pulling out in front of you in minivans?
No. I mean, really, the only times I get angry like that driving, going to get gas at Sam's Club.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Like, if I'm ever actually gonna, like, physically fight someone, it's probably happening at the gas station at Sam's Club. Because there's arrows on the ground. There is a designated entrance and exit. There is a flow of traffic that goes this way.
There's always a ton of cars there.
And yeah, there's always tons of people waiting patiently, or not so patiently, but waiting nonetheless, their turn to get to the pump. And then you have some real scuds that will pull in to through the exit, pull in, and just pull right up to a pump when there's 10 people waiting that are trying to go through the right way.
Right.
And then they have to, like, whenever they're done, they've got to try to, like, get people to, like, move out of their way so that they can go out through the entrance. And it drives me crazy. Drives me crazy.
I feel that. But maybe they only do that because they seen their dad do that.
Maybe. I found out recently that my dad actually does do that. So, I didn't get that from him.
So you went the opposite direction, where now that's like you were the example of where your parent was absent, so you became the helicopter parent. You went the opposite direction.
Right. You're gonna see me on the news one day with, like, basically replaying that whole scene from Hot Rod where Danny McBride beats that dude. Does he have like a
traffic cone? Ain't it?
Traffic cone, yeah. Because they have those traffic cones where they're at that exit, trying to block, trying to make people aware. Hey, this is an exit. Don't enter this way. So they've got, like, cones sitting on, like, half of it.
Right. And my steering wheel in my truck is actually bent from punching it. And I'm not a violent person. I don't have an explosive anger. But it's just, it's particularly, I think, because of the danger. Like, I think people don't understand, like, I think everybody does understand, but they don't think through the dangers that we put ourselves in vehicles every day.
Yeah.
Like, in the particular instance when I punched my steering wheel so hard that I bent it, we were on the interstate, traffic flowing at 80 miles an hour, and the guy in front of me slams his brake to allow somebody to merge in that was trying to squeeze their way in, not understanding that we're all going 80 miles an hour. And so I've got me, my wife, and my son in the back seat of the car, almost about to slam into a wall of cars at 80 miles an hour. Like, but that welled up. So, like, once we cleared that situation and weren't involved in an accident, my initial reaction was like an outburst of rage and anger and surprise and even just relief, I guess, that we weren't just murdered on the highway. And it manifested itself in a punch to the steering wheel.
Yeah.
But those situations are so tense because there's so much danger involved. You're going such a high rate of speed and like it just it kills me, man.
Yeah, and are those reactions something you can control?
In that moment, no, because literally immediately after I did that, I was like, why did I do that?
Right. I did catch myself about to do something like that today, and then I stopped myself. So in some situations, maybe you can control it. Some situations, maybe you can't.
Right. I mean, and there is a really, like, we're not qualified to speak on the science of things, but I
Right.
know that Sam Harris speaks some in that book, Free Will, but there's been studies that show, like, if they can hook you up to a machine and, like, based upon what part of your brain lights up, they can know what you're going to choose before you even are cognizant of what you're going to choose, like, which gets pretty weird into the, that's why I've said from the beginning that, like, there's even a debate around whether we actually, how much freedom we have in our freedom of choice even, is because, like, you just based upon what lights up in your brain, they can tell what you're going to choose before you're even aware of what you're going to choose. It's right. Like, I don't remember the number, but it was overwhelmingly right. I think it was like something like 85% of the time they could tell you exactly what you're going to do based upon what region of your brain lights up before you're even aware of what you're going to do.
Interesting.
But I think that to me, like, the whole thing, because, like, this is where the whole freedom of will and whole freedom of choice thing really are interplayed together, because, like, you can say, like, let's use an example of somebody, like, doing dope or whatever, doing drugs, hard drugs. Well, you can say, like, that person had a choice to do drugs or to not to do drugs. But, like, some people, for whatever reason, are predisposed to, like, even just having those desires, the will not being free, you can't control the fact that you desire to do that drug. So then that puts you in a situation to where there is a choice. I've never even faced that choice before in my life. I've never had to make a choice of whether I wanted to smoke meth or not.
Right.
Because I have no desire to do so. That's not a part of who I am. Like, that's, for whatever reason, it's not like I just decided one day, if, like, you know what, I'm not going to want to do meth. That's
Right.
You know what I mean? It's just not, like, that's not I have my own struggles, but that's not one of them. So I'm never in a situation to have to even make the right choice.
Right.
That's how, like, the two things are so tied together. Is just like, yeah, you can say that, well, somebody had a choice to make and they made the wrong choice. But even just being in a situation to have to make a choice.
Yeah.
Which is your will, which you can't control.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, part of the reason to make it theological, to kind of wrap all of that in theological language, part of the reason we can't control our will is because our will is bound.
Right.
Right. It's by whatever we want to say, the flesh, Satan, sin, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a way to make perfect sense out of the doctrine or the theology behind some sort of fall in the Garden of Eden, right? Like, what has fallen? I mean, if you take sin seriously, then, like, yeah, our will is a slave to sin.
Right.
That our will needs to be liberated.
Yeah.
It needs to be purified, to use some of it needs to be refined by the refiner's fire, let's say, to use some of the language that me and you use quite a bit on here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that, perhaps that's, that's, I think probably that's a huge part of salvation, is the saving your will.
Right. The freeing of your will so that you are free to make the good choice.
Right. And that's where it becomes a thing between, is it choice or determinism? Because I don't even think, like, that's one of the arguments against universalism, right? It's like, well, God's not going to force anybody to choose him. Well, no. But by freeing your will, I take seriously the irresistibility of God and God's power, right? Like, I believe if your will's truly free, you're always going to choose God. There's no way around it.
Right.
I mean, again, especially considering that you don't control what you can't help what it is your will. Like, if all that junk that misaligns your will is burned away,
right,
then you're always going to choose the way,
Well, to say that we could choose anything other than God with a truly free will would be to say that God is not satisfactory.
Right.
That God isn't the true.
You would be saying God can't.
Well, yeah, but you would also be saying that your deepest desire is unable to be satisfied in God. Like, if you were able to see God for who God really is and still deny, like, if you were able to see in truth who Jesus is, who God is, and still reject that, it would be evidence that God is in fact not the fulfillment of your deepest, truest desires for good and beauty and truth.
Right. Yeah.
But that just can't be,
Right.
right? If God's anything,
It's not congruent with a lot of the things that we say in church. Let's just say that.
well, yeah. But if God is anything, God is truly the good, the beautiful, and the true. We talk about the God-shaped hole, right? Augustine said it like this. He said, God has made us for himself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in him.
Mm-hmm.
So what could it has to be that if you are seeing in freedom, freely seeing the truth for what it truly is, there's no other choice to make but the good choice.
Right.
Him.
I really like the language of light and darkness, right? Because and it's, again, that's scriptural language too, right? He's the light. I mean, but darkness isn't a thing. It's simply the lack of light. Darkness can't fight light. It
Right.
can't resist light. Light just lights up darkness. Darkness is the absence of light. So if you inject that light, the light of the world, into the darkness of your will, it's going to light it up.
Right.
A darkness is just the lack of that light in there, but there's no way that the darkness can push out the light.
Yeah, the darkness has not overcome it.
Exactly.
The true light, the lights every man, has come into the world. The darkness did not overcome it. Cannot overcome it.
Right.
Yeah. No shadow won't light up.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So, do you think that if determinism is true, if our thoughts, actions, all of that is sort of in a way determined, does that make the problem of evil unable to live with it? Like, do you think that free will, or some, maybe not free will, but like, which I don't think that either one of us really truly believe in a full-on determinism, because I think if we did, we would think that there isn't real responsibility on your part to make a good choice.
Right.
But if that was true, I feel like that would make the problem of evil way worse for me. Even if universalism is true, which I believe it is.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
I mean, it's not... It doesn't make it where... It's not... It wouldn't be so earth-shattering that it would... I think it wouldn't cause me to disbelieve. But... I don't know.
I think it really, for me personally, I haven't thought about this in the last few days. So, this is me live thinking through it as you're asking it. I think that it all depends on how things are determined. That even adds a layer of complexity to that for me. Because if we're saying that everything is divinely determined, then that's a very hard one to overcome. Because then God is directly causing.
Yeah.
He's the main cause of all those bad things, right? So that makes that problem of evil extremely hard. It makes it a little bit easier of a pill to swallow for me, and understanding that I don't think that when we even to the degree of determinism that I think exists, I don't think it's a divine determinism. I think it's the result of our experiences and emotions and situations and circumstances that we've been involved in that mold us into who we are. So like any deficiencies in my personality, let's say, or any deficiencies in my person, my being, isn't necessarily a deficiency that God put in me. It's a deficiency based upon the actions of the generations before me and so I think it would have to be a mix of both, depending on how you because if you would think that your soul, your being is divinely formed in a certain way, but then
Yeah.
it's molded based on your situations and experiences and circumstances. I can see where that one doesn't cause me near as many problems, because it actually means that it really puts, I'm really trying to emphasize that it puts weight on, like, the things that you do in the here and now absolutely matter,
Right.
and so,
Yeah.
like, even if you think that God is eventually going to work things all out in the end and things are going to get squared away, like, you have to take seriously that you, as the body of Christ, play a huge role in that, because in living out the way,
Right.
your actions and words are shaping the future for the next 100 years,
Right.
or
Yeah.
more. So,
Right. Which is why, I don't want to get sidetracked, but
yeah, that's all I was going to say. Was, to me, I think it depends on how you frame it, because I don't have near a problem with the problem of evil with the way I conceptualize it, strictly because I don't think of determinism as like a God playing with action figures kind of way.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are folks, like, particularly in the Calvinist tradition, that would say that, yeah, every single thing that you do is divinely dictated, in a sense. Like,
Right.
you're only doing what God is sort of like sovereignly deciding you're going to do, or has decided you're going to do. The thing is, you kind of run into that, I think. Like, there is no understanding of free will. Even if you want to take the most, like, strong libertarian free will stance, I still think you end up, God's not off the hook for
Yeah.
all of it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's and that's what makes it hard, because I do think it would make it worse if, like, every murder, every, like,
Right.
evil act that ever happened was like God could have done something other than, but chose to do this.
Right.
Um, but even if, again, if you want to take that free will approach, I mean, God still set this whole thing in motion, and if you believe that God has foreknowledge,
Right.
then, like, in a sense, you can't choose other than what you're going to choose, because God already knows that you're going to choose that. So you can't.
Right.
And I know that gets a little tricky. Like, some people don't see the issue there. They don't see how it's like, just because God knows that you're going to choose it doesn't mean that you don't have the freedom to choose. And that's correct. And you have a genuine freedom to choose option A or B. But if God knows you're going to choose B, and has known from all eternity you're going to choose B in this moment, then you don't actually, you're not going to do anything that he doesn't already know you're going to do. And yet he chose to create you in the first place.
Right.
Therefore, and I don't know, and I don't even know that, like, God has that kind of knowing, that kind of knowledge.
Right.
But
I mean, you could take that argument all the way back to the very beginning. I mean, like, if you knew how things were going to play out and created it
right.
that way anyway, like, why do you just create it different from the beginning? I mean, depending on how far you want to take that,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
can
yeah.
take it all the way back to the genesis of creation,
Right. And that's why, like, the problem of evil, like, that kind of is like, I think that we just can't. I think it's a genuine contradiction, and I think we just kind of have to leave it at that. Honestly, like, I think that anytime we try to explain how God is good and yet evil is present in our world, I think anytime you try to explain that, you're gonna end up saying things you probably shouldn't say.
Well, I think part of that is the exact same thing that we said about judging other people. Judging God would work
Right.
the same
Yeah.
way. We don't have his vantage point and can't see.
Exactly.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
Right.
it is, from my perspective, there are a lot of things that, like, well, if I was God, I would do that differently. But, like, no, you wouldn't, because you would see things differently. You
Right.
would
Yeah.
have a different point of view. You would be able to see things from a different vantage point, different paradigm. So
Yeah.
yeah.
which a lot of that I kind of view as, because I don't know that I mean, I don't have a hard stance on this, but I don't know if I don't know that there was some like time in history where there was perfection and then we fell from that into what we have now.
They're not going to make Earth great again.
Exactly.
Mega.
You're right. It's more like make Earth great is kind of what I would say. Not again.
We're more of a meg than a mega.
Right. So because I think that like the goal for creation has always been for it to be good, you know? And so I don't like that whole Genesis narrative. I don't know that I necessarily read that as like some point in time where things were perfect, but like more as like the and sort of like an explanation as to why we are the way we are, in one sense, but like also just like a like Irenaeus talks about it as like they're Adam and Eve like being children, like they just didn't know what they were doing. Well, like I think that that's the point. I think that we're all in process of learning. We're always supposed to be in a process of learning, and we're all on our way to the telos, the completion. Whenever everything is what it was always intended to be, but we are in the process of that, and that process involves pain and suffering and trials, and that sucks. But if that was the best way to get us to this end that is great for everyone and everything, all of creation, finally in its full flourishing, what God always intended for it, then yeah. I do think that if that's where I do think that ultimate redemption, universal reconciliation, whatever we want to call it, universalism is, for me, it's a necessity, really, because if it doesn't, I really do think that that makes the problem of evil almost well, not almost, but probably like just too much for me to handle, you know. And I don't know. Maybe that's wrong.
But again, you can't control what you think or believe.
Right.
You know what I mean? So like,
Right. Yeah. I don't
it
believe
just is what it
that,
is.
so.
I mean, which
Yeah.
is a funny thing, you know, with belief. If you're being honest with yourself, you don't choose what to believe. You can't just snap your fingers and be like, oh, I'm going to decide to believe this. I'm going to start believing the earth is flat.
Right.
That's not how it works. I mean,
Yeah.
just is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how people thought this conversation was going to go, but it didn't really quite go the way I thought it was going to.
I honestly didn't have any expectations. I had no idea where it was going to go. So,
Well, we kind of haven't talked to, I mean, we've been talking about it in one way or another, but maybe not in the way that people maybe thought we would talk about free will.
how did you think we were going to talk about it? We can talk about it how you thought we were going to now.
Well, I guess like more of what, maybe a sort of rehashing of the conversation we had with Phil, but we've been all over the place.
Yeah.
None of this is things that we talked about with Phil, really.
No, I mean, I didn't think there was that much to talk about because I felt like we were saying the same thing just from different. That's why I wanted to emphasize the language right up front. Is because I felt like in that. I mean, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, but I felt like you were using the phrase "free choice" or "free will" in the way that we're using free choice. which I believe is a incorrect way to use those terms. So that's why you were wrong.
All right. Yeah.
And then, well, I don't know, because he also said something about at the end that I disagreed with, basically about what was it, choice coming before will, and that was, I feel like that's the wrong order. Our choices are derivative of our will. We desire something, right? Again, going back to I desire an ice cream. But that's my will. My will is to have a bowl of ice cream. So therefore, because I desire that, I have a choice to make. Now, I didn't, that craving for ice cream wasn't something I cognitively devised on my own. That's a craving that came up because I like ice cream. Why do I like ice cream? I don't know. Like, that's just, there's different, but I didn't consciously decide to crave ice cream. It's just a craving that went up. But because of that craving, because of that will, that desire that I have for ice cream, I now have a choice to make. Am I going to eat ice cream or not? So will comes before choice, in my opinion.
So yes, but there is that element, and this is what I think Phil was getting at, where like, yes, you have a will that always comes before your choice, but that will can be influenced by your choices.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think that's maybe where he was trying to go with that, which is that, well, like when you use like something like working out, for example, like, you. I know, like, you may not want to do it,
Right.
but if you make yourself go and if you make the choice to go and do it, then like, if you do that over and over and over again, you can get to the point where you actually want to do it.
Right.
Like, you start to see results from it, and you start to enjoy it,
Right.
and you do want to
But
do
I
it.
think even that choice of deciding, am I going to go to the gym or not, has to start from somewhere.
Right.
Has to, there's some sort of stimulus, which I would describe as a will, that initial decision to go to the gym or not to go, because even if you don't want to go to the gym, you don't feel like you want to go, there was still a decision to be made there. Something caused you to make a decision between, do I go to the gym today or not? And sure, you may have chose to do the thing that you didn't feel like you wanted to do, but you have to acknowledge that decision arose from something.
Well, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So the choice is never the first thing. There's always some underlying factor, some underlying will behind every choice.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you ever make a choice without first having a desire.
Right.
I'm just saying that your future choices,
yes,
your future will is determined by your present choices.
Right.
In some way.
And I would agree with that. I mean, that's part of, because human beings aren't static. Just as what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about our childhood and our environment and our experiences and our situations and circumstances molding us into the person that we are. It's not like we're molded into a person and then we're that person until the day we die. Right. We're constantly adding to and subtracting from, and we're constantly in flux. And so every experience that we experience is still molding us into new people. So of course, the choices that we make, the situations that we find ourselves in, the environments that we put ourselves in, or that we find ourselves in, all factor into the next set of choices that we have to make, right? Like and they mold the will, like let's say, for just some abstractly, your will is to live a moral life according to what your interpretations of scriptures are. You want to be a good church person, a good Christian, a good little Christian boy. But that has to, like, there are things that you can do to, like attending church regularly and restudying your scriptures or whatever, watching back pew convos that
Right.
that can move your will even more in that direction, probably more so than somebody who's never stepped foot in a Christian church. They're not going to have that same will. You know what I mean? So that's obvious that you're just that your choices and decisions factor in. But there's also, again, in addition to those choices, there's randomness. There's some luck, there's some randomness, there's who you were, all those factors that you've been acquiring from your birth to the day that you are now, So
yeah,
there are things that you can do that can factor in, but that's just one factor out of however many bazillions of factors there are that have contributed to make you who you are.
Right.
And even then, Paul says, the things I wish to do, I do not, and the things I don't want to do, those are the very things I do. So you can even have a will that's directed towards the good and still make the bad decision.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
I don't think any of us are putting ourselves in any more pious positions than the Apostle Paul was.
Yeah. I do think that that is obviously a temporary thing. He says, Paul also says, for now we see through a glass dimly. I think that the only reason that we don't always make the right choice now is because we do see through a glass dimly, right? But one day we will see face to face. We will know as we've been known and all of that. Every eye will see him, all of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, I think that you may have actually given a similar example to this before, but like if you were faced with a decision of two doors, if one door leads to the most endless suffering that you could ever experience, and the other is eternal bliss like you've never experienced before, you have to choose one. Like if you know what's behind which door, nobody's going to pick eternal suffering over
Right.
eternal bliss. If
Yeah.
you can see what's behind each door, you're always going to pick the bliss.
Right. If you can see the truth of the matter.
Exactly. But if you have no idea what's behind each door, or you have a delusion about what's behind each door,
Right.
if you think that, or again, the delusion, if you think that the door that leads to eternal suffering is actually bliss, then you're going to choose that door.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like,
but that would be a delusion of your will.
Exactly. That would be like that to me. That's a beautiful example of the fallen will, so to speak, and the idea of knowing, like how that works out for me. It's not that when your will's purified, then it's actually free. But what we have now isn't free as long as we're not, especially if we're not. That's evidenced by not choosing the good.
Right. We have a will that is ignorant to some extent and corrupted in some way. Or maybe not even corrupted is the right word for it, but a will that just is not complete, that isn't whole, that isn't perfected.
Right. And you wouldn't expect it to be. If we're living in a world where things exist and we understand that we are shaped and molded by our experiences, our will is, and our person is, then you wouldn't expect for your will to be perfectly right. I mean, I don't know why would you expect that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, are we
For a couple of knuckleheads, that's the best that we've got on free will. I mean, to me, it's one of those topics to where it really is a big topic, and I think there is a lot of things that that can be said about the topic.
Yeah.
But as far as like, do we actually have free will or not? To me, it's not even really. There's not that much to say about it. It really is just being honest with yourself and looking at and just sitting with it and thinking about it for a couple minutes, and then you're like, oh yeah, well that's obvious that we don't actually have free will. Like, yeah, sure, we can debate and look into the topics about free choice all day, and the degrees of free choice. That's a real conversation. But free will, especially, and this is another thing that I think gets missed, is like if you're even 1% not free, then you're not free.
Right.
So in order for that means that your desire and your wills would have to 100% be like, nothing could influence your will or desire, but you choose what you desire when you desire it at all times. If that's not the case, it's not free. It's all or nothing. That's the way freedom works. You're not like partially free. You're either free or not.
Right.
You know what I mean? So to me, it's not even really it's kind of a funny thing when I was thinking through this topic, because at first when we decided we were going to talk about this, I was like, man, this could be a freaking long one because this is a big topic. And then as I started thinking about it, I was like, actually, it's to me, and this is probably just because I'm half moron, but it's not even that big of a topic. Like the free choice topic is a much bigger one to me. The free will thing is just obvious. Like just look, just think critically about it for a minute.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that there are people that would make intelligent arguments for it.
Well, that's why I said probably part of it's because I'm half idiot. But
yeah, I don't, for myself and just the, what little bit I have studied this issue, I haven't found anyone, whether it's a hard libertarian free will, or it's like the hard determinism, or anything in between, or any sort of combination of the two you want to try to think of. I haven't found anything that's just really satisfactory to me on it.
Right. I mean, just think about this. Like, think about for a minute. Think about the foods that you like. What's your favorite food?
I love pineapple.
Did you just consciously choose that pineapple was going to be your favorite food, or is it just your favorite food because you like it?
I just like it.
Yeah. Like you can literally think through all these things. I mean, to me, this whole thing factors into a lot, even with like the, LGBTQ issues and stuff. Like my sexuality is what it is because that's just what it is. I never chose to be attracted to what I'm attracted to. And I think if every single, functioning adult has their own sexual preferences, the things that attract them that they're drawn into, and we didn't choose those things. That's just who we are.
Right.
You know what I mean? So why would we expect it to be any different from that subgroup of people? Like, I don't know, but you know what I mean? Like, think about the things that you like. Did you choose to like those, or is it just what you like? Your favorite food, your favorite colors, your intimate favorites, like just anything, like anything that is that you desire, any kind of desires that you have. Did you consciously choose those are going to be things I start desiring, or do you just desire those things? Unless you always 100% of the time decide, no, today I've decided that I'm going to start liking pineapple. That's going to be my favorite food from now on. Unless that's the way your mind works, then that's demonstrably your will's not free.
Right. Yeah. Well, I have been on overtime, so
slaving away for the man.
Yeah.
It's so. Well, it's not funny actually. It's kind of sad. But the other day I was getting ready to leave. I had to go to the office. I think it may have been last Friday. Finn was awake. He was like, "Dad, what are we doing?" I was like, "Well, I'm about to leave to go to work." He was like, "Why?" And instead of just giving him the broad answer, I told him it's because I was born into a wage slave society and I'm shackled to the man.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
I've been forced into a life of glorified indentured servitude, and that is my reality. So I wake up and go to work.
Yeah. I need to find something that I actually enjoy doing and do that instead.
I'm actually, I don't know, this could be a whole conversation on its own. I'm actually really struggling. Like I'm really struggling with the whole idea of like, yeah, I'm almost 40 years old. Like, more than likely, my life is more than 50% over, and I'm just sitting in front of this computer. Like, what am I even doing? Like, my son is growing up, and I've only got so many more summers with him. Why am I not but then knowing, like, the practicality of, like, life, it's that constant contradiction and this, like, that feeling of helplessness, of being trapped in a situation. Like, my life is fleeting, but I'm trapped in a way that I can't do anything about it. Like this, that feeling is something I've been really struggling with the last couple of weeks. It's almost like if you spend too much time thinking about it, you'll get yourself into a mind frame of like, what the F am I doing? But then you're at the same time, like a lot of ways, depending on your situation and circumstances, your hands are tied. And it gives you a real sense of hopelessness and a real sense of nihilism and despair if you let it, I mean.
Yeah.
Just being honest, it's something I struggle with lately. And it's the weird thing about it is I don't hate my job at all. It's a fine, but I also there's no living to it. Like I find myself a lot of time just sitting there staring at the computer, just feeling totally unhappy and unfulfilled. Not in a miserable sort of people are cussing at me and just making my life miserable, but this is just not what I want to be doing with my life.
Right.
But I have no choice.
Right.
So, I mean, I guess I have a choice if I want to blow up my family's life and again, talking about how my decisions mold my son and what would be the greatest hell for me is thinking I screwed up my son.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Well, now that we've sufficiently bummed everyone out.
Not to take us all into an existential crisis, but I might be kind of in one right now.
Well, you ready to call it good on this one?
Yeah, man.
All right.